the most significant story in U.S. history, the elections of 2020. Today, I have Professor David Clements on the David Rutherford Show. One of my favorite things to do with my show is to bring context to my audience, to give them the full story. And as we move into the 2026 election cycle, I think the full story needs to be broadened to go back and include the intensity of what we saw in the 2020 elections. Now, I understand that many of you have a lot of things you've heard or seen that you believe can discredit the information that the mountainous amount of information that has been compiled by many different sources in many different ways. One most recent is the book by Ralph Pizzulo with Gary Bernstein called Stolen Elections. There's other information that Mike Lindell has brought forth. But until recently, I had been following one man in particular, Professor David Clements, and he has been on the campaign to try and bring this vast amount of information to the entire country. He's given over 200 evidentiary presentations in 47 different states. And he does so in a way that's consumable and digestible. So what I wanted to do as we kick this off, because this will become a major focus of this show for the foreseeable future, in order to prepare the American public for what they might face in future elections. So without further ado, I'm so honored to bring on award-winning professor, criminal prosecutor, and my favorite, which is a gray-haired punk rocker. As a fellow punk rocker, I've got a social distortion tattoo all down my side there. It is such an honor to have you on, sir.
Hey, David, it's good to be with you. I love social distortion. I'm glad to hear that. In fact, the band that I played in, we tried to get their guitar tone. So a lot of Marshall, Les Paul type guitars. I got them on the wall. But yeah,
a little bit of that rockabilly with that undertone kick to it, that West Coast punk rock.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, it's so glad to have you on. The documentary that I was referencing is Let My People Go. And obviously, you didn't just go from being a professor in New Mexico to being one of the leading advocates to bring awareness to the American public. So can you really briefly explain how you got from that point to where you started to realize, whoa, I need to look at what's taking place in the election system?
Yeah, the catalyst for me was I was a longtime prosecutor here on the border. So I live about 30 minutes north of Mexico. And you just can't do the types of cases that I did unless you're very familiar with trafficking, whether it's human trafficking, drug trafficking. And 2020, if you take out the drugs and just put in votes or ballots, it's vote. Mm-hmm. And so it just screamed, it was just I had a very clear vision of what was going on. And I had run for office, over a decade ago. And when I ran, it was the introduction of Dominion in my home state. And I just remember being up in a U.S. Senate race, 14,000 votes against my opponent. And the next time that the election night reporting came up on the website, the votes flipped. Now, it was completely abstract to me then. We call up the Secretary of State's office. What just happened? And we hadn't counted the mail-in ballots yet. That's what accounted for it. But I'm sitting there going, how can 5 minutes time elapse and have a complete switch? The precision of it always jarred me. But at the time, I didn't have any real skepticism. I was kind of a product of my environment. And I just took them at their word. But there were moments from that night until 2020 where I was always wrestling with this abstract puzzle of what the hell happened in my own race that I think prepared me for November 3rd. Dominion all of a sudden took on new life. The anomalies that everyone saw. And I think the thing that really got my attention the most was the censorship, the fact that people were just shut down, which just got my hackles up. So, I had been living a fairly benign life as a law professor and enjoying my career. The stakes were low. The only thing that I really had to worry about were kids, complaining about the grades that they got. And it was such a refreshing change from doing murder cases and being underpaid and underappreciated for the better part of my career. But I felt like I was being called into a fight where, while there were professors that definitely had better credentials and went to better schools, there was just a vacuum of people willing to risk saying out loud what they intuitively knew. And so I guess after leaving that environment of being a prosecutor, and I could kind of see the change at the university setting from the standpoint of, like, if you want to see woke policies in kind of the incubation stage, you go to the university. And that's where I was. So you could see all of the after effects of critical theory or critical race theory. You could see what was going on with the push to make sure you treat they, them a certain way. And I'm sitting there going, I don't think I want to be a professor if I have to kind of bow the knee and start using people's pronouns. And it was hostile. And when the was in on election night, you would have thought that demons in my university were just shrieking with joy. I mean, they were just, I didn't really understand how much contempt they had for Trump. But it was loud and it was apparent. And I was kind of just grieved because I always kept my politics to myself. I've always been kind of a small L libertarian. I wasn't a Trump guy in 2016. So it was one of those things where I'm sitting there going, I think, number one, I got the man wrong. And I learned that over the first term. By the time we were about halfway through, I'm like, I actually like this guy. I'm going to vote for him. But in my environment, it's very, very dangerous to voice that as a professor. So everything kind of slowed down. And I started pushing back in the university first and foremost, and which put a huge bullseye on my back. And then when January 6th happened, I really had a supernatural encounter is the best way I can describe it. When our countrymen were protesting this election in Washington, D.C., I was at my cabin in Ruidoso, New Mexico. And after Mitch McConnell, Mitt Romney, Kelly Loeffler basically stabbed the country in the back, I was so sickened that I thought that was the death of our country. There's something on a spiritual level that
I felt the same.
Grieved me in a way that I don't think I've ever felt. The closest thing I can describe it is, while I didn't watch Game of Thrones, I read the books, and there's the Red Wedding, where you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, the betrayal here is just insane. Yeah. I felt that sickened. And so I go out in the woods, and something happens. I won't go into it, but it changes me. It rocks me. Like it's like the closest encounter that I had to the presence of God, of a purpose and a call.
Wow.
And so I come back, and my wife is despondent because she saw what I saw on the screen, and I ended up recording a response to my university president, who condemned all of the Trump supporters as trying to pull off a coup. And I responded to him, and I put up a video, kind of like a giant FU video, because I started collecting all of these clips of Antifa people that were there, that were bragging about their agitation. And as soon as you put something out, the internet would scrub the video. You couldn't find it. So I had like this library of a ton of videos. I'm like, no, this is a false. And I think I was really sensitive to it because I had done a series of active trainings as a prosecutor. Every year you'd have to go into the courtroom, and you'd have to, have blockers and roles to simulate an event in the event that the courthouse was attacked. And I'm sitting there going, this is like glorified active training. And there's no way you could have convinced me otherwise because of that experience. And so I put out the video, And at this point, I'm like an award-winning this and award-winning that. I've got one of the highest-rated professors. Even the liberal folks, they just assumed I was liberal by the way I look. They come to my office. They want legal advice. I mean, I'm fairly well liked. And after I posted that video, forget it. It was over. My career was effectively over. And the bullseye got even bigger because I went on Tucker Carlson's show.
Right. I remember that.
In 5 minutes, everything that I had built up from a career trajectory was over when I went on his show. And so I knew my time was going to be short-lived because I've seen how these people play. It's dirty. And again, I didn't want to do the Zoom teaching either. So part of me was like, I was so sickened by the mandates of walk this direction, go in that door, but don't go in that door, that I'm like, I didn't sign up for this. I mean, I had a dream job of being a professor, but it wasn't this version. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that really impacted me was I was a consumer protection expert. So the stuff, I would have been the biggest hypocrite on planet Earth if I ignored all the things that were going on with masking.
Yeah.
And my career as a professor was short-lived. And then I started interviewing kind of like in the old prosecution days. I would have set up a case. I would have done a proof analysis. I would have found witnesses and interviewed them. I'm like, well, I'm not a public servant anymore, but I can interview someone that submitted an affidavit, or I can talk to an attorney and pick their brain. So I quickly created kind of probably the biggest long form library in 2021 of experts that were either attorneys or did the technical work. And within 6 months, I was kind of sought after because the views on some of these videos were like 700, 800,000 views for nobody. I wasn't even on social media.
Right.
And so there's like this part where kind of conservative Inc. is seeing my rise, and they're trying to figure out whether they can kind of break me in to be a part of the club. And there's certain third rails that you just can't touch.
That's right.
And so they liked my story. They liked the fact that I'm conservative. They liked that I was articulate, but they were really bothered by any discussion of the voting machines. Mm-hmm. That was like the thing that you just had to stay. It was unspoken. And so I'm surviving, and then I get to the Cyber Symposium, the first one, and which I look back now was a giant trap laid by operators to implode the movement right out the gates. Yep. But we survived it miraculously. And so that was kind of my introduction to the world from an election integrity standpoint. But as soon as I left that stage, bar complaints, trying to strip me of my license, the hit pieces started coming. And for the next year or two, kind of felt like a man on an island because there are so many people with bigger megaphones that I thought were heroes to the country, and they ignored this issue. So I've been kind of consumed with it. But to wrap up, we got a happy ending in January of this year with a blanket pardon for most of the January 6th protesters, which was huge. So I spend most of my time now when I'm not putting out articles, trying to fortify our elections going forward with national security experts that I've met and become friends with.
That is a absolute phenomenal story in terms of like, what I always think about, I mean, I come from a similar, I think mine happened probably 10 years prior to everybody. I had gone in, my first trip to Afghanistan was the summer 2002. And, after I remember hearing the stories about the Jawbreaker team, Gary Bernstein's team, the Ground Branch team, the Delta guys that were chasing bin Laden, and then he just magically slips away. And I remember being on the ground trying to, I was the intel guy trying to get information about, all right, well, where do we pursue them? We tried to do, submit some operations to go and, watch the border of Quetta and Spin Buldak in southeastern Afghanistan, which was an exit point in particular for the Taliban. We tried all these things that they just kept getting shot down. And so I was like, wait a minute. this isn't even a year after 9/11, and like, we know where the enemy is. Why can't we go after him? And there was no explanation. And so I'm like, oh, that's weird. Then I go back the second time in '05 with Blackwater, and I'm a part of the counter drug commandos and training them and mentoring them on missions. And I go on several missions where there's nobody there. And I'm like, wait a minute, why? Wait, we have access to DEA files and all this, and, we know where. And then I remember, talking to one of the DEA guys, and they're like, oh, you think this is real? You think this is like, we're going to damage 95% of the Afghan GDP. And he goes, did you ever hear about the Phoenix program in Vietnam? I'm like, a little bit. I don't really know. And so that opened my eyes, like, oh, and that's just about when the opioid crisis began to kick off in America with cheap opium from Afghanistan. Then the final coup de grace for me was working for the agency in 2010 and 2011, and being in Pakistan in 2011, and the drone strikes that were just unleashed all over the world. I mean, more drone strikes than we ever did before. And it was just like, going and looking at the BDA and going, wait a minute, what's going on here? And just really began to understand that what I thought I knew was not what was actually going on. And that really began to shape it. And then I think really within probably when the IRS scandal against conservative libertarian nonprofits started, I was like, oh, this is internal as well too. And at first I just kind of wrote it off as, all right, this is just the way different political parties operate. There's always something. But then, it really began to shift, and you started to see kind of these color revolutions emerge around the world, and, and what they were attached to and whatever. And then for me, the final point where I was just like, no, this is bigger than anything I could ever imagine, was the investigations into Trump. And then how Clinton was handled with all of her classified material, her server, how that went away. Then it focused on Trump as a Russian asset, which was just on face, just the most bizarre thing I'd ever. And that was it. After that, I've never gone back and been like, all right, our institutions are intact. There's a consistency of governance that's for the people, and, you combine in the other aspect, the '08 bailouts of corporations and all this stuff. And if you're paying attention in not even in depth, like, you don't even have to get into it in the manner with which you've gotten into it or some of these other people, but just on the surface, if you're paying attention, you begin to add it all together, and you realize what we understand to be true is just not true. It's a manipulated form of reality. And I love how in the documentary, Let My People Go, you talk about how to teach kids to discern lies from truth. And the quote was in it is, you dream of breaking through the feed which keeps us asleep. Can you just talk about that quest and what you mean by that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the film opens up with a propaganda trailer, right? And once you get done with the theater, I'm sitting in the middle of it, surrounded by people that are just paralyzed, right? Because they're receiving the story. And I can't tell you how many people that have seen the film have come up to me and have resonated with that. Like just feeling that like they're alone, like everyone at the Thanksgiving table. Some are jabbed, some aren't. Some people can talk about Trump, some people lose their minds. And I think the quest for me started quite a bit before 2020, 9/11. My wife's a structural engineer, so Building 7 presented problems. And I just remember feeling so silly about how you kind of have to do this dance to talk to people about, what do you think about that? And how, it's like a scene out of the Matrix where people start glitching because you can't, there's something about their programming. We can't talk about that. And also wrestling with my own probably cowardice that I don't want to make waves if I'm being honest. And, you know, and I came from a pretty dysfunctional background, so I wasn't in a place of leadership. I mean, I was stocking, you know, grocery shelves. So it's not like I had the weight of the world. Like, I'll be the one to prove to you the problems about 9/11. But I mean, just remember, just in casual conversation, like, I know in my heart that what I saw isn't real. I know in my heart that this guy named W, if he's not evil, he's controlled by evil people. And that journey developed, and it was like I'd get a red pill each year. I mean, I wasn't taking the whole bottle at once. Like, my brother's a complete conspiracy theorist, but he took the bottle all at once, and it was always telling me, like, you know, it's the end of the world this, the end of the world that, and it wasn't a very healthy way of approaching it.
Definitely not.
But I was phased in, and the second big structural shift in the way that I thought about politics was the Federal Reserve. And my long paper in law school was on whether the Federal Reserve had ever received a meaningful audit. And, you know, the answer to that is no. Mm-hmm. But when you realize that 74% of economic literature, at least at the time, is Fed sponsored, you'll find out that there's no criticism of the Fed. So I was trying to look for source material that question about whether or not centralized planning was a good or bad idea. And you couldn't find anything. You'd have to go to the Mises Institute. You'd have to listen to Ron Paul. Mm-hmm. And I just remember submitting that paper to professors that were like adherents of Keynesian economics. And it was like, they're just looking at me with kind of disgust. Like, why would you write this type of thing?
Yes.
But I remember being offended by that because you'd have politicians talking about the bridge to nowhere and pork barrel spending, but the amounts were like, you know, $1 million here. I mean, still large dollar amounts, but you compare that with Congressman Alan Grayson grilling the Inspector General of the Federal Reserve on where $9 trillion went, and she had no answer for it. And I'm sitting there watching the hearing, and I'm looking around. I'm like, nothing that we talk about from a policy standpoint, from an economic standpoint, makes any sense. It's all noise. It's all theater. So the depression kind of sets in on like, okay, I'm definitely unplugged from the matrix, but it still was abstract because it hadn't affected me personally, not yet. And when I became a prosecutor, that was really, when you were talking about your experience in, the overseas theaters of war, for me as a civilian prosecutor, realizing how much power the cartels had over my office, over the judges, you kind of go in with these aspirational ideas of, I'm going to be a white hat. I'm going to be a person that's going to fight for the truth. And you're sitting there going, my God, my district attorney that I work for is more corrupt than anyone that I've prosecuted. And this was also around the time that Edward Snowden had the revelations of PRISM. And PRISM was a tool used by special operations divisions. And I headed up a task force that included the DEA, as a HIDTA attorney. So it was high intensity drug trafficking areas. I was the senior attorney for 3 counties here on the border. And we'd have these hits where people would go to locations and have seizures of drugs. And I'm sitting there going, how in the world did you all know to bring a drug dog to a propane tank in the middle of Pepper's grocery store? Like, can someone just explain to me what prompted you to do that? And, you'd end up pulling that thread, right? Mm-hmm. And next thing you know, you're almost 100% certain that they're using PRISM as a tool in my cases. And the problem with that is that they were teaching the agents parallel reconstruction. So they were fudging their reports to never let people know or tip them off that they were using the tool, which violated the accused confrontation rights. It violated Brady. It violated all kinds of laws. So I'm sitting there going, wow, for about 6 years, almost every case in here is probably questionable from a standpoint of whether the convictions. So I had a crisis of conscience then where I remember it like it was yesterday. The task force comes in. It's like a scene from Sicario. These guys had just got out of the gym. They got their gear, and it's clear they want to intimidate me as a young attorney, letting me know how things work, that they're the ones that get the drugs off the street. They're the ones. And I'm just being gaslit all to hell. Mm-hmm. And, come to find out that many of them were selling drugs out of the evidence lockers because they never make it to trial. They were funding their own operations. And I remember just looking at them, and I told them, I'm going to dismiss all these cases that I found where I felt the tool was being used. And that didn't bother them at all, which is a problem. I said, but unlike the dismissals you're used to, because it's called a nolle prosequi, which is basically in the interest of justice, you dismiss it. You don't provide any factual basis for why you're doing it. It's under the discretion of the acting attorney. I said, I'm going to identify you all publicly. And I did this in 10 cases. And I walked it over to the courthouse, and I met with the judge in that district. And I told him that I'm dismissing these cases, and I want you to know I'm not corrupt. So, because some people could accuse me of dismissing the case. I'm doing something. It's like, I identify them. I want you to know. And for all I know, he could have been cartel bought, but I knew I could not be a drug prosecutor on the border with the task force that I was using. And then I wrote up a memo, took the cases over to the public defender's office, and told them, if you guys care about your clients, you should appeal every drug conviction in this jurisdiction going back 6 years.
Wow.
And had a meeting with the district attorney. This was a gal that was a user. There was a civilian recording of her weaving in and out of traffic, driving a state car. And they call in state troopers to come in, and she's practicing her field sobriety test. So you put it all together. And I remember telling her, because I wanted to be a white hat prosecutor, one of the good guys. And I remember having to tell her, like, do not dismiss this case. If this agent comes to you over my head and tries to get rid of this, they're corrupt. So I was fighting my own agency.
Oh my gosh.
And told her, I was like, look, if you want to fight corruption in our office, I'll stay. If you don't, I'm gone. And of course she didn't care, because, it was one of those things where you're trying to pick a jury for a DWI case, and the entire community knows that your boss got away with it. Mm-hmm. So, these are the types of things that kind of informed it, and it breaks your heart, because you're sitting there going, where do I go? Like, because there was a way to do the job and get paid and come home and just kind of go through the motions. They would let you get low-level convictions of mules, but they would time things. They would know which Border Patrol agent was bought off to make sure that when the big loads came in, they weren't going to check that car. And the money that they had funding their operation was embarrassing compared to what we had. So we would have like binoculars looking into these desert patches, and they'd be looking back at us with gear.
With infrared hologram sights and night vision. Yeah, for sure.
So all of that to say that, once you've had your heart broken about, the way that you thought the world works, you can function. It's like you're kind of dead to the world. And as long as you don't care what it thinks, you can operate. But if you're torn between the two worlds of, I want to be accepted, I want the promotion, then it's soul fracturing. And, I think by the time 2020 came around, I was so sickened that I just didn't care. I didn't care if I got fired. I didn't care if the papers wrote something about me. It's like, why the hell am I even on this planet? If I've got to pretend that what I saw at the university or what happened on election night is real. I'm not okay with this. And so it was kind of all in. I was all in, and you have to count the cost on how you're going to be attacked, how your family's going to be attacked. And so I've, from death threats to witches and warlocks, cursing, weird stuff that, I can't even explain the stuff that's happened on a spiritual level to my family, the protection we've received from prayer warriors. It's been the most surreal 5-year journey where not only did my career just implode, but I'm also like on a private jet riding with Mike Lindell. I'm having dinner with President Trump. I'm across a table from General Flynn. I'm going to Dallas having lunch with City Powell. And everyone's got their own battles and their own imperfections. Like none of these people are perfect. You find out that they're just like you. Like they're manipulated, psyop after psyop. So much information was thrown my way that was garbage, and you're sifting through it. So, there's a period of probably a year where you're just seeing red, like the paranoia. I mean, people cannot understand the level of paranoia. And there was a season where I tried to master that, because I'm sitting there going, I don't trust anyone. I don't trust anything. And the enemy is probably really happy with that outcome. And I think around mid 2022, I just kind of had a quiet conversation with God about, all right, how do I do this? How do I operate? Because this is so different. Not only is the government not going to save us, they're the biggest threat to my existence. Mm-hmm. And that's hard to say as a longtime government prosecutor. Like, okay, the biggest danger are people with badges and a printing press. So in the film, it was important to talk about those spiritual dynamics, but also the psychological ones, because a lot of people are sitting there going, why don't you just get right to the elections?
No.
Why don't you just get right to it?
No.
And what they don't realize is that I've done so many evidence presentations where I would have people and I could answer all of their questions. And their response would be, if you're right, then how come a judge didn't take the case? That's and that was their argument. So if you don't address that psychological aspect of, because the judiciary's captured, that's why. But you have to lay it out for them. You actually have to show them the Milgram test, the Ash line test, and show them, like, I'm not crazy. Like, this is documented science where people will go with the crowd 9 times out of 10 if it means, they might look silly to the world.
Well, I love that you did that. That was what really reeled me in, right? Because it took me, obviously, if you become a member of the special operations community, you're going to have to ingest a fair share of indoctrination, right? To just, be pointed in a direction and to go, after whoever they tell you to go after in the ways with which we do. And then at the intelligence agency, you have to become comfortable with, you don't need to know that, just go do what I tell you to do, right? And that hyper compartmentalization, and what, it's a completely different way that they indoctrinate case officers, that the way they indoctrinate special operations. But you have to fuse those together, and they're dependent upon one core principles of that never quit, highly dangerous, high risk operational mindset to shut up and just do what we tell you. You don't need to know why, and so it took me a long time to unravel that. And it was also a part of my own spiritual faith that ended up doing that as well too. And which took me probably from 2012 to really 2017, 18, when I met my new wife, who was a person who's fundamentally imbued with the recognition of her own truth, which is her faith and her family and her deeds. And so that really helped me kind of cross the line of it. But in context of these other systems that were fundamentally broken to their core, right? And the big ones, we're not just talking, the operational systems of a particular region or area, but like the big systems on, how we partner with criminal elements to elicit intelligence that fulfills the need we want for a particular shift or change in a particular government, in a color revolution, right? Like you're starting, wait a minute, whoa, we're doing what? And it's that pull, it's that spiritual pull. It's that, hey, this is wrong, and you're being betrayed, but you still have to feed your family. You have these skill sets that are valuable in a particular way. They're a derivative of that system. And you're in this sense of betrayal of yourself, the system and your overall, what is it? It's that desire not to want to let go of the comfort of ignorance, right? That cognitive dissonance, right?
Well, I mean, everything that you're saying, like I resonate with so strongly, because there has to be, you have to be okay with the death of self.
Yeah.
It's the only way that you can navigate
beautifully put
what you're talking about. Because if you're split down the middle, you're of no use to your family. You're of no use to the world. You're definitely of no use to God. And, so it's a very lonely place, because you're spending most of your time in your own head. And from the outside, it's like, everything looks okay, but your soul's damaged. Right. And, I think that's what, was probably the biggest learning curve for me in transitioning from a public servant as a prosecutor, even though I had law enforcement bona fides and I had a badge and I had undercover agents. I was still working with the premise that the government, at least my idea of parts of it, are the good guys and these are bad guys. And once you disabuse of yourself of the notion, no, actually that's a high value target for Satan. That's a high value target for infiltration. And that was probably the biggest growth in my discernment over 5 years, is that in a nation state game, and when you talk about elections, it's as nation state as it gets. It doesn't get any more nation state. I'm telling you right now, I've talked about elections. Out of the two, it's far more dangerous to talk about elections.
Can I ask you a reference? Because Jordy and I were talking before. The way I kind of assess it right now is the jab itself was a global scale of betrayal, right? 5 billion people injecting that poison into themselves, gene altering, gene editing substances that had no efficacy, no nothing as a play for compliance, right? As an idea of compliance, as well as who knows whatever, nefarious ideas that are underneath it. I mean, obviously when you dig into, the fact that DARPA made it, how they export it, that whole thing. I mean, like that's mind blowing. But that's like humanity. But this itself, and what I firmly believe, and I believe this in all of my, everything in my being, that America represents the last bastion before total chaos, right? It's the thing that gives the rest of at least us, it gives us hope that there is still a framework that can be rebuilt or reconstituted if enough people get behind and have this awakening, have this sense of regaining a truth of what is true versus what you want to believe, right? That it can happen here. That and 500 million guns and who knows, maybe like 2 trillion rounds of ammunition also have a nice buffer system to it. But do you think of it in that context, or do you really, like, how do you rate the intensity of what it means that our election systems? I mean, if you believe what Gary's research does, in terms of 76 foreign countries have been manipulated, in particular South Central America. And then you have what they estimate, they said tens of thousands of little and big elections in America since 2011. Is that in your mind the greatest challenge that we have in not only in America, but in the world?
I do. And I think that's why it's so jealously guarded by legacy media, why most of the appointments from Obama and, to the degree the Republicans got those appointments wrong, they themselves were part of the problem, to create gatekeepers. So from a standpoint of who signs off on what people can do, from, cases that you would receive through intake as a sheriff, you find out that Soros has greased the skids and put people in strategic places in swing states And so you start looking at this like it's a giant matrix of how would you undermine a country, and they are so systematically disciplined, and how they did it. That's why it was so hard to believe, because people were sitting there going, 2020, surely this is just garden variety that we caught in a few places, but it's not the entire thing.
Even the Dominion CEO said that, right?
Yeah. And so they would concede that, and and you're sitting there going, no, the data tells a much, much different story. So to me, it's kind of like, I look at this from a kingdom standpoint, like kingdom of heaven, kingdom of darkness. The old stories are the true ones, right? And I look at humanity, and I look at, just like God's got his angels, he's got believers that can be vessels for righteousness to imbue a country with virtue. And you have the same thing on the other side. You've got people that are being used by something evil. It's a demonic spirit that works in and through them. And that's what accounts for people that when you talk with them, facts come out of your mouth. You've got all of the arguments. You're right. You're substantively right. And their eyes glaze over and they don't care. Like, what accounts for that? Because that's really the focal point of, if this is just about rationality and reason, we win. So, and it's not enough to say that Biden's dumb or Kamala's an idiot. It's like, no, right. They're performing. They're performing. And what is idiocy to use, because they are not acting rationally or in conformance with the truth. It's like, no, we're actually the idiots, because we don't realize that we're being played and manipulated by them. And we engage in the perception theater by, parroting a story that we see on Fox News or parroting a story that we see on CNN, as if we should ever use those entities to affirm reality, right? So I look at, you got the two kingdoms, and then you've got something that Satan has always been into: subjugation and slavery. And the quality of slave is different than it was in the Civil War. We don't need the strong, fit African-American male in chains. We don't need to beat them. We'll do the exact opposite. We're going to use white, weak beta males. We're going to feed their senses with pleasure, not pain. And we're still going to rip them off 50 to 60 cents on the dollar. That's a pretty good return. And as long as we can keep them fed with garbage food, give them Netflix for cheap, they'll show up to their job and we'll keep taking from them. It's a parasitic type of environment. So when you look at it that way, the machines writ large, I'm talking about the entire system, is the slave master's new whip. It's the tool. And it's what makes everything go. So when I say that this is more important, it's not to diminish the loss of human life. And what I'm talking about is that the slave master tool is ground zero for perception on policy making, whether someone's elected or selected. So every issue you care about, whether it's babies, Bibles, bullets, they're all downstream from that black box that no one will let you audit. So whoever controls the black box controls the economy. They control the House, the Senate, the judiciary. They control the talking points. They control the leverage of subsidization, of taking your tax dollars and weaponizing your own tax dollars against you. And so that's the battle. And right now, the biggest obstacle that I have isn't the radical left, because I can see them a mile away. It's not, It's not even the establishment Republicans. It's conservative Inc. It's something that walks and talks and looks a lot like MAGA. And boy, are they effective in communicating things that are mostly right, mostly true. But there's a little subtle pivot. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. And it's probably one of the reasons why I don't get invited to the prom with any of these conservative events. But there is still this wholesale protection of the machines. Yeah. And most recently, Raheem Kassam did a puff piece to the National Pulse selling the Liberty Vote acquisition of Dominion as a wonderful thing. Like it was the death nail to Dominion. And I have a very well-placed source that had a one-on-one conversation with Rahimi. He did not disclose that he had a conflict of interest. There is a concerted interest in DC to do the rebrand to keep the machines there.
Of course.
And when you look into the owner and CEO of Liberty Vote, he has been in the election space for 15 plus years. He ran an election in Kosovo for the Obama administration. He was a pioneer of the electronic poll books, which give you all the metrics that you need to figure out how many fake ballots to create. He acquired a group called BPro and merged with it. And BPro is responsible for this thing called Total Vote. It's a completely cloud-based technology where you can elegantly subvert elections in microseconds. So when you get it out of your head that it's not about, whether China is hacking into our machines, it's codified fraud where you've got tax dollars being laundered back into NGOs, and our own Department of Homeland Security through the Center for Internet Security has entered into legal contracts to live behind your precinct firewalls. So they don't have to hack. They get to live there because we signed the paperwork and it's our tax dollars that put them there. And they hate MAGA. They hate Trump. They hate you. They hate me. And now they've got this integrated cloud-based technology that not only allows them to monitor voter rolls, election tallies, election night reporting, but they can change it. So most of the evidence that we placed in that film weren't hypothetical subversions. These were documented subversions where we gave you actual proof along that assembly line. But what Ralph and Gary did in their interview with Laura Logan was get confirmation from the Smartmatic whistleblowers that are telling us. And it was pretty cool to be affirmed, saying, something, we were right. We didn't see all of the gaps, but if you overlay their disclosures with our work, you see this nice niche. But right now, the biggest concern and biggest worry for people like myself are thinking about this like it's a football team. Now that a Republican's in control of Dominion, we can all take a break, right?
No.
And that's the kind of stuff. And then the other thing is that there's no remedy that I can think of where the legislature will get its act in gear because they are there by virtue of these machines. They have no interest in getting rid of them. So you've got to dream up a legal avenue that Trump can declare, not ask, not beg, not jockey for approval, but he's going to do what he needs to do as the commander in chief and treat the subversion of our elections no different than. He doesn't have to ask Congress to strike down a missile. It's that framework where he can go in there and say, I'm not asking you. When Serbia is coming in here and when Venezuela is coming in and intervening in our elections, that is the most undermining thing that you can do to a country's sovereignty. So when I look at the airspace in Venezuela, I'm here to tell people, if you think this is about drugs, it's not.
Yeah,
and
they don't know, right? They don't understand the totality because it's so big, right?
Yes, and not only that, but you've got all these people that will pull out their pocket constitution for a day, and like whether it's Marjorie Taylor Greene or Rand Paul, and these are people that I historically used to really, like, but they're so quick to tell you that Congress gets to declare war, and I'm sitting there going, you guys sat on your hands while the war was brought to us, and there was an actual invasion at the border, and there was a digital invasion in our code. And so the president does not have to wait for Congress. He does not have to listen to a court to repel that invasion, and so that's the framework. And I think Trump's there, but if he puts on the mantle of Article 2 power, he's working under his plenary authority as commander in chief. He just needs to do what he needs to do. Because if he doesn't, and we're just playing this political optics game, then it's game over.
Right. Let me ask you a question. So obviously everybody listening, you have to, we're going to put the link to the documentary and it'll lay out the details of what David gets into on the systems, how they do it. It's a brilliantly done. You'll really enjoy it. But the thing that I think always, and you referenced this in the beginning of our discussion, was the idea, all right, there's, nobody heard these 90 cases. There was no merit there for evidence to be brought forth to be able to do it. And I think everybody goes, well, if that's the case, bring it forward legally in some type of RICO conspiracy case and try it through the court systems, and we'll get to a place where legally we can make the changes and force the Congress and the Senate and whatever to do it. Why is that so unrealistic? And that almost an emergency powers act of national security is the only way to dismantle the system. Why can't we do a grand, like the people of the United States, some giant class action lawsuit that you have 20 million people sign a petition to be a part of, and then you go. Why can't that take place right now?
Yeah, if people asked me how Trump could make good on his two most important promises, promise number one, when he put his hand on the Bible in 2017 and said, "I'm going to give you back your country." Mm-hmm. That's a huge promise. You could say that it's, just speech writing. And then the other thing is that he said that he caught them all. Mm-hmm. He caught them all. So his presidency will be judged on whether he can keep those two promises. And as it stands right now, maybe he's done the most important part of getting us there, but we haven't seen the accountability.
Right.
And so in 2021, even then, if someone asked me, Dave, do you think that he can drain the swamp through a DOJ or a civilian system? And the answer is no. Mm-hmm. That's the system I more or less mastered. Mm-hmm. And due process concerns are just too high for the accused in a civilian framework. And so when you've got people that can wait out the clock, and we're not talking about your garden variety thug or criminal, we're talking about John Brennan.
That's right.
Hillary Clinton. Not only going to lawyer up, they're going to have every single conceivable argument, and they can appeal to authority because a lot of the sources are coming from captured elements of the government. Mm-hmm. So one of the biggest and most frustrating things to do during COVID was, you couldn't argue and win in court because the CDC had an official statement from the government telling you what reality was. Mm-hmm. And so even in the cyber arenas, you had the sizes of the world. You had the Department of Homeland Security. You had Chris Krebs telling you that everything's perfect. So how do you fight that when the rules of evidence in a court system treat many of those sources as self-authenticating, meaning they come in by virtue of it came from the government, and therefore it is evidence and it's in front of the jury or the judge. And everyone else that's telling the truth has been destroyed by a USAID funded news network. Mm-hmm. And when they do a comparative analysis between the internews and some glorifying puff piece for these poor election clerks that are being accosted by people like me, you lose 9 times out of 10. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm reminded because I'm not a soldier like you. I came in this as kind of a bastard kid that found his way into a really weird place. And,
God put you there, that.
Well, he did, but there's this thing of, okay, I'm familiar with the art of war and the famous quotes of keep your friends close and your enemies closer, and win before you even take a step onto the battlefield. There's these maxims, and I'm sitting there going, if Trump is who I think he is, then I need to expand the way that I think, and I need to start thinking about tools that no mere mortal civilian has that he has. Mm-hmm. And what is it about this guy that he walks differently? He talks with confidence, and he's not faking it. You can tell when people fake it. Mm-hmm. And so you start thinking, okay, I have helped the public understand how rigged elections are through civilian sources, public records, and I think we've carried the day from our end. Mm-hmm. But if you were to ask someone to prove it beyond, any doubt, then you're getting into a Space Force NSA paradigm.
Yes. Yeah.
Where the commander in chief can declassify and show you exactly how it's done.
Right.
Trump's got that. So when he says he's got it all and why he doesn't seem worried, it's just a question of, will you use an emergency broadcast system? Will you force feed and just force these tyrants to take a look at their tyranny and let the public look on?
Wow.
That's what's going to be required, but it's going to have to be a military commission, tribunal setting to do the level of that's necessary. So RICO is great. Racketeering's okay, but you're talking about 20-year caps and due process rights that are not built for mass prosecution. It's just not. So when people get upset with Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, what's going on with James Comey, Trump is not who I think he is if he's going to solve this problem through the DOJ, because it's beyond them to handle this. So I started looking at military commissions, and I wanted to ask the question and answer it legally without, any of the mystique that comes from Q and some of the other stuff that's out there, which I find absolutely fascinating. I'm not someone that craps on that stuff at all, because in many respects, they're so far ahead of everyone on just critical thinking. But I want to ask legally, what can Trump do? And there's a case called the Youngstown decision. It's the preeminent case on war powers, where the president's power starts and stops. And it was written by Justice Jackson's concurrence in particular. And he was a Nuremberg prosecutor. So this is a guy who had experienced the unthinkable in a post-World War II arena. And we're there again. Like, we're in a Nuremberg-like moment. And he talked about the president's powers about being at their peak when he's got Congress's backing. It's at its lowest ebb when they're fighting him. And we all have to concede right now that there's no way that Congress will work with President Trump to solve any of the things that we're talking about, which means he has to act in open defiance of a captured Congress, number one. Number two, if the military is part of this, you have to explain the oddities of what happened with Biden, this human gaffe machine. Why does it look like he's on a movie set? Why does it look like it's not the same person? Why is he taller? I mean, these are all things where people can write it off and walk past it and say, Dave, you're crazy. But I'm telling you right now, when President Trump tells you at Quantico that he's the 45th, 46th, and 47th president, but he doesn't want to take the credit for the 46th term. When you've got him brandishing a chart at rallies and it says that he left office in the lower corner in April of 2020, that's not a typo that you can,
right, just pass
justify
by
at rally after rally after rally. And he says, this is the chart that saved my life. And everyone just ignores that thing in the corner. So I'm sitting there, I want to take Trump at his word. That's the way that I'm looking at this. I'm going to stop being twisted and turned by all the different talking heads. Is he telling me the truth? Because if he left office, the only way that makes sense is through a continuity of government framework. So what are the legal circumstances that would justify continuity of government? And if you look at where our country was in April of 2020, it checks off all the boxes. You've got U.S. Citizens being by chemical agents. You've got people already telegraphing how they're going to and have the influx of mail-in ballots. I think the military was signaling to Trump that you can give them the ultimatum, open up by Easter. And what did the intelligence agencies do that were captured? They gave him the middle finger.
That's right.
And it was game on. White hats, black hats. But he had to play this artful narrative battle where now 2020 to me isn't even a real election. It's about perception theater, because even if he would have seized the machines through an executive order, which he had the legal authority to do, he would have lost the narrative war, because the narrative seeding was so strong from people saying that he was a tyrant that would never let go of power. And people wouldn't have known enough at that point to weather that type of conflict.
Right.
So you look back and you're sitting there going, well, all of a sudden, I now can have an accounting for the confusing mess that was Joe Biden, who was the greatest red pill dispenser that I've ever seen. I can now understand why war-torn areas, there was no heavy military presence in places like Afghanistan. And you know this better than anyone. There's no way that the military-industrial complex would leave those opium fields. They would leave certain places that were funding their pockets. And so what you saw was a vestige of control on the corrupted aspects of the intelligence agencies, the money laundering operations through Ukraine. But when it came to military might and actually going places that we had been for 20 years, notice that all of that was gone under Biden's watch.
Right.
So it presents a lot of questions, right? And then you've got, again, the Quantico statement. So you add it all together and it looks like a shadow presidency was in effect. And that presents questions. But if that's the case, I can now explain away how in the world the National Guard can be federalized and deployed to do policing in the United States, which would otherwise violate posse comitatus. Mm-hmm. I can make sense of the fact that Trump doesn't seem to be bothered by any legal ruling that seems to go against him. I can make sense of why he designated Antifa as a terrorist organization, Venezuela, narco-terrorists as a terrorist organization. Understand that the interplay of Smartmatic having a foothold in each camp. Mm-hmm. And then you start seeing that there is a plan. And I've got confidence, and it's about when do you execute on that plan, to pull the rug from everyone, to not let the cockroaches scatter. And so he's got 3 years to perfect this and do it right and do it by the book. So when I started looking at the UCMJ, all of a sudden the things that I was having heartburn over started to find their place. I researched the Dakota Wars. This is the biggest trial of enemy combatants. One tribunal did 396 cases in 37 days.
Wow.
So you do the math. You're going, wait a minute. Okay, that's one tribunal. What happened if we had 20 military courts
active at once? Yeah.
Over a 6-month period, you could do 15,000 trials like that. You want to do more? Go a year, go 2 years, go 3 years. So the framework starts to make sense on what Trump is doing. And I think the frustration of many American consumers or patriots is that they just are kind of pissed that they don't get the debrief. And I don't get the debrief. Right. It's not like the president's telling me what he's doing, but there's this huge thing called the military that none of us are pondering. None of us are thinking about. And it's going to take that kind of authoritative power that is outmatched under certain categories of strife, where I'm not worried about Judge Boasberg. I'm not worried about the judiciary as long as the military has President Trump's back. And I will concede it's a big if, right? Until we see victory, I'm either a completely, brainwashed lunatic for even espousing these things on your show, or I'm right.
Well, for me, I by the way, thank you. That was absolutely outstanding layout for the possibility of what could go. And, there's always the people like going, this is bull. There's no way Trump has the capacity for 4D chess or 5th generation warfare or whatever it is. And obviously, he's been around it long enough to know, and he's been under attack long enough to know that, and he survived. That's the first thing. I mean, we've seen many other cases throughout history where presidents did not survive that attack and went away quickly. And so that's the thing that gives me hope. And everybody's like, well, he's part of it. And, he's just one of their minions. But for me, the biggest thing lately that kind of lined up was the show of force out of Venezuela, right? The categorization of both Antifa and the cartels as terrorist organizations. And then the most recent one was you see the opposing force come out and basically say, hey, if you're in the military, it's okay to disobey orders. Like it's your duty, right? It's your duty to disobey these unlawful orders, which is, in my opinion, in line. Like I didn't think about it in terms of like what you did with the military tribunals and the magnitude or scale of prosecution in that level. But obviously the military is a key component of enforcing these types of things. And, that's why we're starting to see the assaults on. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's the only way, if we're looking at the art of war, that Trump wins before he takes the first step
right
onto the battlefield. I mean, and so the things that you're talking about are key, but there's one thing that to me has kind of pushed me over the edge to think that, okay, the military has to be involved. And that's the outcome of last November, November 2024. Knowing what I know and knowing what you saw in the film, there is no way in hell Trump could have reacquired his position in the White House unless there was a significant intervention that would have required the kind of backing from a United States military. There's no way. Mm-hmm. And the huge disparity between what we saw in 2024 versus 2020, there's two things that stand out. Number one, when it came to Trump's races, you did not see the materialization of that dreaded F curve where Trump is up by tens of thousands of ballots, and then all of a sudden Kamala on election night gets to pass him. And that's election night reporting. That's not real ballots. That's just what we see on the television screens on those trackers. That didn't happen. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about Gary Bernson and Ralph Pizzullo and the stuff that was going on in Serbia overseas, that has a bearing on the perception theater of what we were able to see and be fed through our programming. And people weren't being given this fictional report that Kamala eked it out. That was not allowed to transpire, which is really, really key, because there was this anecdotal story that Joe Rogan shared when he was at the watch party with Elon Musk. And this was before the races were called. Elon supposedly checks his app on his phone and says, it's over. Trump won. Now, what in the world did he have in his hand to be able to say that so confidently?
Right.
Well, I think what it was, that was the confirmation of the intervention that took place, that they could not, the perception of votes coming in, to showcase Kamala in the lead. And then you're sitting there going, okay, if it was anyone else, you could disregard it. But you're talking about SpaceX. You're talking about Elon Musk, who has put a Manhattan Project level disbursement of thousands of satellites into the atmosphere. And wherever you have satellite dominance and satellite infrastructure that works in tandem with the NSA, you really have the final tool on what you get to see on a screen, on a television. So they had a answer for that didn't appear to materialize in 2020. So that's number one. Number two, there were interdiction efforts to stop the influx of mail-in ballots showing up on the scene in places like Pennsylvania, where they got through in 2020. It didn't happen in Trump's races in 2024. So how does he have the ability as a non-president? Because again, Biden's still in. How is it that Space Force or some type of cyber intervention was able to stop the bad guys? Where did the force of law come in to all of a sudden stop vans loaded with ballots in strategic places? Why did it work this time, but it couldn't work when Trump was effectively the one who was in control of all of that in November of 2020, 5 years ago? So these are the kinds of questions that I just tell people, don't walk past. And it was also so artful that there was enough corruption and that you couldn't say that the elections were, because you had the anomalies with Kerry Lake and Sam Brown. There was at least 8 Senate races that were outright from Republicans. There were 30 House races in California alone.
Yep.
And one of the debriefs I went to DC and I met with a congressman, one of his top attorneys, and he showed me video and picture evidence from the day after November 2024's election, where they did a spot check at the Runbeck facility in Arizona, which is where they do the industrial scale printing of those ballots.
Right.
And you had non-English speakers loading up pallets and put them on Penske trucks, and they were headed for California, Nevada, throughout Arizona, Colorado. And so if he knew that, Trump knew that. So you add it all together, and perhaps it's like, no, we're not crazy. Perhaps our intuition and our common sense are telling us one thing, but there is this knee-jerk reaction to kind of want to be black-pilled, because how long do we have to put up with this nonsense? How long do we have to be on this roller coaster ride? But there's no way, to recap, there's no way that Trump gets in 2024 absent some type of military-like power to intervene in the cyber world. I'll take that to the grave. I don't think anyone can convince me otherwise.
The one thing that I come up with in my mind is that the country had gotten so hot, in particular after the assassination attempt in Butler, and you saw, they see ammo sales, they see gun sales, they see what's going on online, right? They built that entire infrastructure of what Mike Benz calls the censorship industrial complex. And they had CISA and all those groups monitoring social media and people within the social media itself, that maybe they thought it's so hot. If we try and this one, there'll be a full-blown revolt, which there's no trials, there's no there's no tribunals. It's just like, it's chaos. And then people are hung in the squares back in the day. So let's let this one slide. We got enough people internally to press against. We got enough people inside his whoever he has to elect, right? He's got to put in 2,000 people who then put in 10,000 each or whatever it is. It's, the scale of appointees and you're bringing in seems virtually impossible. We've got that. So we'll just let him go through. We'll push him. We've got the judges dialed in to push back, like we're seeing. The case to dismiss Comey because, right, that the attorney general of New Jersey wasn't lawfully in place. It's just, there's no end to what they'll do.
Yeah. So I wouldn't discount.
Can I finish this real quick?
Yeah.
So it was so hot that they're just going to be like, all right, forget it. Now they start the psyop of playing with the other elections. They regain some control, some House, some Senate seats. 26 is a landslide for them. It shows the public is upset with the ICE raids and the No Kings rally, that whole thing. And then 28, because he's gone, it's back down to that 51-49 majority minority with JD Vance. They load him with possibly a non-likable running mate or whatever it is, and they put in whoever they want for the next one.
Well, I think one of the reasons why I inappropriately interrupted you is because I'm so excited, because normally,
I know, me too. It's like I just said the whole thing. I've got this going in my head
because you're running with some major horsepower to spot what you just did. And so one thing I just want to agree with you but what people need to understand is they got to get away from this idea of evil is static. It's okay. Constantly there's a dynamic, and you're not saying that, but there are contingency plans, right? And so you've got your plan and you try to execute it. Team evil has to respond and try to respond. Then you respond to them. And so what you're seeing is it's not either or, both can be absolutely true. That Trump has got the hardened aspects of the military. He's trying to fill strategic roles, get rid of people. And then you've got the remnants of the captured judiciary, captured legislature, doing all the things that you just mentioned. And I think what happens is many people, and they can be right, that they think that that's what's going to win out. It's like the ultimate limited hangout where we just get enough truth. You let, some air out of the tires and it's going to be more of the same. And I think there's a lot of people that truly feel that this second term is going to be that. It's like they're going to wait out the clock and Trump is going to be mastered at some point and it'll be the next guy in and the pendulum's going to swing back. So one, I just want to concede that I get that and I can't convince people not to feel that way because I see that stuff too. But I come back to this place where it really is an article of faith. And it's not to say that Trump is a 4D chess master. I think he is. But it comes down to winning. Do you have a vision for winning? If I believe that Trump was all about the political optics of just having another term and playing the game, well, shame on me. I'd be like the Apostle Paul, like my entire faith would be shattered for believing in this guy called Jesus, right? It's kind of the same thing. I don't see that with Trump. I see this as it's to the victor goes the spoils. And there's enough movement in places, but you have to look in places where no one's talking about them. And that's kind of the military chessboard. Because if Trump isn't wielding that, if he's not wielding the tools that he has as the commander in chief, we're talking about the most powerful man in the world, then one, he's a fool. And two, he will be destroyed. And that's where it gets really simple for me. If he doesn't see this through, everyone in his administration is going to jail, him included. People like myself will not be around to do this podcast in 4 years' time. This isn't hyperbole. And so I think he knows that. And so when I see the optics and the narratives over Comey, and I'm sitting there going, guys, you're getting upset over a dismissal, but what's the charge? Perjury? Do we think that the sins of James Comey can be leveled with a perjury charge? Yeah, it's absurd. There's got to be a whole category of things that are in the seditious conspiracy world. And unlike the cases that you can track on a Pacer account, which is public record, none of the things that I'm talking about, you and I can have eyes or ears on unless we're vetted and in the military. Right. So that's kind of the $1 million question is this article of faith that I have going to come to fruition? Or in a year's time, is everyone going to say, Dave, I told you so. It's way worse. Trump's the Antichrist. We've got the same caliber of bought and paid for politicians. And that's all possible. But I see an election, at least on the federal races, because I don't think he can master the ballot from a statewide standpoint. But I think from a U.S. Senate race to a congressional district race, so you're talking about a 2-race ballot, can be hand counted. I think it would be conducted by the National Guard. I think that can be lawful. And maybe you don't get to do that on other races. But what you're going to find is that we're not a 50-50 country, that it's probably an 80-20 split. And people's heads are going to explode when they see what it really is. And then all of a sudden, you're not dealing with a lame duck presidency where you're put out to pasture and everyone forgets about Trump. They're going to start courting J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio or whoever's going to take the reins. They're going to sit there going, we've got a whole new crop of MAGA-like candidates that might want to repeal the 22nd Amendment. Maybe the trolling of Trump having another term isn't just trolling. Maybe there's a legal pathway to secure, this victory. So I think our country's fortunes will win out or fail in the midterm elections. That will be the definitive sign for me, and I hope I'm right, because good Lord, I can't go through another 4 years like we did before.
Well, that's the thing. Like I as you're sitting here and the way you obviously, you're a trained evaluator, right? You're trained to assess information. And then through that assessment, you're able to, to connect the assessments in a logical manner that gives you a semblance of structure that you can build your reality around, right? And that's what you're doing, and you have done for the last 5 years, even greater, from back the time when you were a prosecutor and you realize the crooked nature of the cartel influence on people and law enforcement and everything. But now there's a different thing at stake, I think, for you and for me. I've got 4 daughters. I know you have children. You've got a wife who's immeasurably invested in all of this. My wife in terms of supporting me, and because I battle the same thing, is like, all right, how far do I go on the microphone? How do I have Professor David Clements on my show? Because as soon as I do, then, it's like, oh, you let the crazy election denier guy on, and it's like, and like you said, that conservative ink begins to push me over here, maybe, or over there. Or, one of my closest friends in the world is Sean Ryan. And, he just had, a buddy of his, Tucker Carlson, on. And, it's like, all right, I'm going to bring this pariah now of conservative ink on because he's my friend. I want to hear what he has to say. And, Sean's like, nobody's going to own me. And so that idea of freedom for us as strong men that believe in something that's much deeper than just elections, that faith in what Christ tells us to be as men and seekers of the truth, right? Ask and ye shall find, open the door, it will come forward to you. And, that's our responsibility. However, we do have these children. And so if you were speaking to young people, I'm going to ask you to speak to young people, in particular, 22, 23-year-old men out there right now, and girls, what do you say to them in the midst of all of this? How do you invoke, one, a deeper train of thought, but 2, a deeper faith that good, that your faith that will prevail?
Well, that's a deep question, and I'm gonna do a weave to get to that, because something that you said really, it's something that I didn't realize how much I was wrestling with it until you articulated it, which is, the risk of how far you push the microphone. That really resonated with me. And many of the things that I'm sharing with your audience have been validated over time. And it was at considerable risk to be the person that said things when I was literally a guy on an island in 2021. And so to the OGs in the election integrity movement, I have a cachet and a credibility with those people because I spoke when it mattered. But there's also been a timing with me too. I'm probably a little bit more aggressive than most people in trying to future cast and cast a vision for where I think things need to go, whether I'm right or wrong. And in most cases, given time, things play out kind of close to what I've been articulating. But there's always a risk of, in faith, I've got something that I think God's given me, this download, and I think it's true. And I think he wants me to share it because I need to shepherd minds to be prepared to see themselves in a more empowered way 6 months from now. And there's always a risk, because if you're wrong, it's like you're the false prophet or you're X, Y, and Z. And I've struggled with that, but my instinct is always to risk having people think that I'm crazy, or potentially, batshit crazy, depending on what the topic is, if I've integrated it and I believe it. Like, okay, so once I've got that conviction, the only times I've ever had regrets is where I've run away from my intuition and kind of sold out because I wanted to be courted by the right people. And that's made me very, very dangerous for kind of the top tier podcast, the Tuckers of the world. There's a reason why I haven't been on those shows. Like I can defend my positions tooth and nail, But I also get why they might not want that. It gets back to something that I shared before the show with you, that I won't share who his name is, but my largest promotional partner for the film on the day of the launch pulled the rug from me. And I would have had 5 million people at least see that film through this platform. And the reason being was because that day, Rudy Giuliani was hit with a $148 million verdict by Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. And they're in my film featured. Mm-hmm. And so the prudent thing is, if you want to be courted and you want to get the film out, take them out of the film. Mm-hmm. And so I actually have to evaluate these kind of, this quid pro quo of, I could have a safer film and it'll be seen by people, but it pisses me off that these who scanned and rescanned ballots in the heart of the State Farm building, who sold my country out, that put us through hell, that I've got to avoid that because I'm afraid of litigation. I'm afraid of these corrupt lawyers. And I've been in these depositions for 8 hours defending clients where there's 18 attorneys on the other side, 18. And it's just me and my nation state expert. And they're trying to destroy the man through a giant trap that you just kind of, you get locked into this place of like, why am I in this movement? Why am I in this battle? And if we're going to battle, let's battle. Let's pull out the battle axe. Let's go after it, and we'll see who's standing. And so that's the only mode that I know from a standpoint of how to fight in this space is, I don't care if people particularly are bothered that I criticize the Scott Presslers of the world, who will register 7 people at a gun show, while in that same county, 53,000 people were deleted off of the voter registration base. Like, that's a conversation we should have. But I realize that's going to make me unpopular with everyone that loves Scott Pressler, right? So right. That microphone discussion, I don't know if I've mastered it. Maybe there's a way to do it better, because I see the bigger shows. I'm like, man, if we would have had those megaphones 2 years ago, we'd be so further ahead in what we need to do. And it kind of bothers me that I have to kind of talk about and telegraph a military solution, because we, the people, haven't held up our end of the bargain to meet the president halfway, to take over these local county commission meetings and tell them to withhold certification when there's fraud. Like, why is that so controversial? And so now we're back in this passive framework where we're kind of waiting for the president to save us. And I don't really like that. But I'm telling you right now, I'm going to take the playing board as I see it. So it's, to bring the weave in, how do I communicate to kids and young men and young women in the space? I've kind of given you an insight in the way that I think, which is all that matters is the truth. And life is so fragile. It's so finite that I don't know if my ticket's going to be punched tomorrow. I could run through an intersection and it's over. And so just find your warriors, the people that you want to yoke with. Have the humility to apologize when you screw up and say something wrong, correct the record. I've gotten lots of things wrong in my evolution over the past 5 years. But ultimately we should be seeking a target audience of one, and that's Christ. If he was in the room right now, like, what would you have me say? What would you have me do? And that's all that matters. And then everything else kind of fades to the background, as noise. Because I really do have this thought that one day I'm going to be standing before my maker. And so every decision that I've made over 5 years to jeopardize my career, my job, came from this deep sense that I would rather be judged by history than my coward peers at the university, the coward attorneys that didn't do anything after 2020. And for those that want to play the game and run a kind of safe podcast where they've got better numbers and millions of views, cool. That's you, and great. I wish I could get on your show, but I'm a punk rocker at heart. And I think it's way cooler to be with the rowdy kids. So that's my answer to the ones out there. And maybe they like it, maybe they don't. I don't care.
That's as punk rock as it gets, and that's as Christian as it gets. Geez, that's the perfect place to end this. I just thank you. Just thank you for your courage to speak your mind. Thank you for going down into these, I think one of the hardest things is to recognize that when you're in a battle against evil, just how overwhelming and how much fear can, rip through your soul, like to the point where every step is a step you feel like you're going to be destroyed. But again, if you do believe and you're a real true believer, that Christ is our King and Christ is our salvation, and in the righteousness that he shares with his truth, that is your pathway to salvation. And so, I think you're a profound example of the things that you believe. There are many, many, many of them that I automatically gravitate to. And I just love so much the way you communicate. You're not insisting, I believe. You're not forcing me. You're not condemning anybody's other belief systems. You're sharing your story of this remarkable evolution to truth, and the fact that you're still in the fight and you're still willing to be in the fight with, you have so much at stake and so much at risk, just proves that you really do believe what you believe, and that in and of itself is noble indeed. So thank you so much for coming on. Where can people follow you? How can they pay attention, and how can they support you?
Well, David, thanks for having me. It's been a wonderful conversation, and it's rare when I get to have a conversation with someone who's been an operator in his own right, who's thought through the kind of the intelligence dynamics of the ever-changing narrative landscape. And so I was kind of nerding out a little bit today. I don't always have the depth of this type of conversation, so I really appreciate that. But as far as where you can find me, I've got a website called theprofessorsrecord.com, all one word, theprofessorsrecord.com. And there's little tabs to the different social media. So find me wherever. And I do ask people to consider following me at Substack. Every Sunday, I put out a weekly article / short film that kind of goes through a lot of these topics. And the one that I just dropped yesterday was on predictive programming and nonlinear warfare, dealing with soft power. So we get into many, many movies, stuff like Top Gun. Why was it that in the bomber jacket in part 2, you don't have the Taiwan flag or Japan? It's geometric shapes. What's the significance of Elsa and the timing of Frozen when that materialized, when Hillary Clinton was kind of an ice queen trying to melt the hearts of the American people? We get into all of that in this episode. So every Sunday I'm trying to give people a meditation, but many of the things that we touched on today are in previous episodes, where I walk people through history and the things that I'm wrestling with. And maybe there's a little bit of wish fulfillment on, I don't know if you see it as clearly as I do, Mr. President, but I sure hope you've got the best, brightest military minds behind you to help us get our country back. And so that's where my focus has been for the past 6 months.
Amen. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thanks, Dave.